Time travel may be one of the most maligned story concepts of all time. It introduces an insane level of creativity, where characters can meet and learn from themselves, where mistakes can be corrected and made to unimaginable degrees, where with a magic which relies on something we all know, time, it feels as if anything can happen. The possibility of altering the past with knowledge of the present is inherently intoxicating to beings stuck in their decisions. But at the same time, it's also a concept full of holes and contradictions to accomplish this, almost certainly a paradox, as it must be the thing which creates itself, at its worst pointing to an absolute level of determinism. It becomes the point of history, collapsing an entire universe down into a black hole of heated debates and moon logic. We can all note a story which was ruined by the addition of time travel. From alternate universes which make everything possible and as such meaningless, to characters retconned from thematic pillars, to bargain bin comfort, to arguments over dinner about how it even happened and by what set of rules. But whatever the case, for better or worse, whether the point or the afterthought, there is something else time travel does to every single serious story it touches. It makes them horror. Whether we know it or not, the very premise of a human traveling through time by their own will is a matter of pain, fear, and isolation beyond what can ever be experienced. It is something which strips the recipient of the very title of human to begin with and drops them into a void of only themselves and yet everything at once. It ruins them, a space beyond what mortal minds were ever made to cope with, and yet it also makes them gods tortured by their power. Today, we'll be exploring why time travel is horror. The Time Machine, an 1895 novella by H.G. Wells, is a necessary part of the coverage, seeing as it coined the very phrase it's titled. Its hero is an unnamed character, only called the Time Traveler, who often hosts a wide variety of occupations and characters at his home to discuss the deeper matters over dinner and drinks. Now, at one of these meetings, he explains his idea of how time travel should actually be possible, stating time as just another dimension to be moved through as any of the others. Nor, having only length, breadth, and thickness, can a cube have real existence. There I object, said Philby. Of course a solid body may exist, all real things, so most people think. But wait a moment, can an instantaneous cube exist? Don't follow you, said Philby. Can a cube that does not last for any time at all have a real existence? Any real body must have extensions into 4 directions. It must have length, breadth, thickness, and duration. Now, there's a clearly mixed reaction to this, some seeing him as a sort of visionary, some as insane, but none really believing it will actually lead to anything. However, for their next meeting, the host is absent, as they all mill around his house being served dinner and drinks without the host's very presence, until he emerges from the lab, disheveled and dirty, begging for his own food, which he scarfs down insanely before explaining anything of his current condition. Now, after changing into some less tattered clothes, he begins to explain. He has just returned from the future, and he's now going to recount his entire journey to them, whether they believe it or not. Having finished the machine a few hours prior, he was determined to test it before his guests could arrive once more. And so, right there in his laboratory, he pulls the lever to go forward in time, and he's pushed into a liminal space as the world speeds up around him, his servants blurring past, moving through him as he's pushed from this dimension. His building begins to fall apart and is torn down and replaced. The city around him starts to follow the same fate, all happening at an increasing speed until nothing is intelligible at all. The force of time weighing down on him harder and harder until he eventually just manages to push the lever back to stop at some distant point in time. And before he's even arrived in the future, well, we've witnessed the horror of time travel. As far as his world is concerned, the time traveler has died. passing before his eyes was the result of his own death. It was the loss of everything he'd worked for and everything he'd built in that laboratory, in that space. And even further, he witnesses this happen for everybody, for all of London, as each building he once knew is destroyed, replaced, and destroyed, and replaced, and destroyed, and replaced again and again, until nothing of the world he once knew remains. And the death of one's culture like that is much more than just a personal pain, a sad remembrance of things past, but rather it is the inability to exist as one once did, to have none of the customs and traditions and objects which made up the life they knew. Even if the time he arrives in has humans, they won't be the same humans. They won't speak the same language. They won't eat the same meals in the same kind of ways. They won't communicate and interact in the same methodology. Their technology could even be so far advanced that he wouldn't even know where the power button is on something, let alone how to operate it. And if it goes the other direction, if things have regressed and humanity is nothing, well then he's at a level too high, ready to be disappointed by his descendants, everyone he meets. To these new people, he could be akin to a witch and killed on the spot, removed from time altogether. Either way, he is alone, a human, but not this era's human. And this is exactly what we see. Arriving some 800,000 years into the future, the traveler finds that where London once stood, there are now empty and rolling hills, save the occasional porcelain-looking towers and vast marble-esque manors, gardens and statues dotted here and there in the courtyards, but all showing signs of age and disrepair. Like him, they seem to be falling out of this era. The inhabitants of this world are the Eloi above ground and the Morlocks underneath, the former being weak, frail creatures of minimal constitution, the latter baboon-like brutes crawling around dark tunnels and underground factories. These pairs exist in an uncomfortable stasis. The Eloi are prey, but saved by the Morlocks' acclimation only to darkness, scared off by the most minimal amount of light. And those factories underground seem to produce everything the Eloi use, with them clearly unable to do so of their own power or knowledge. The traveler guesses that social stratification became so severe that the upper and lower classes split into these two entirely different species that we now see, comfort and pleasure turning the rulers into, well, a picture of absolute and pure weakness, and constant toil turning the workers into brutes who see production as totally inherent and required. The Eloi are excited by his presence, but much like a child would be, soon to lose their interest and go away to something new. They're just picking flowers from the gardens or laughing and clapping hands at his strange sounds, but staring at him entirely blankly when he tries to actually communicate with them, have them teach him what their sounds mean. They allow him food and shelter, but they never once attempt to create a bridge of true communication, which he needs given the theft of his time machine. He can't leave unless he can learn how to claw it back from the Morlocks, and it's not that the Eloi won't help him with this, but or that they won't even begin to understand him making that decision in the first place. And that is, of course, part of the horror he finds himself in. He may have made this trip with all the will in the world to understand the future, but the future has no will to understand him. It doesn't share an interest in the past. It has no ability to share itself for his knowledge, and his will means nothing compared to the lack of it surrounding him. Even with the intent to learn and grow, he is forced to be alone, being out of his time. And this is confirmed in ironic fashion later when he traverses across those rolling hills to one of the porcelain-looking towers, and what he finds there is a building away from the other manors and clearly fallen into disrepair, forgotten from the others. Entering, the traveler finds a museum where human goods and inventions from across the years sit in cracked and broken glass, dusty with empty spaces and cobwebs dotting the collection. The result of the greatest minds of his time and beyond, it all meant nothing without the future's will. It is human history itself neglected, not even a novelty to look at for 5 minutes and say, "Ah yes, how far we've come." This is his time which is disrespected, disappeared. It is him living in a period where his time, his culture, and his life has already been forgotten, even when it was right there. So why would they begin to care now? They've already chosen to forget him before he arrived. The Morlocks are more crafty, but much less welcoming. As he discovers, they stole his time machine as a trap, seeking to capture him and satisfy their curiosity, and likely hunger too. They poke and prod at him given the chance with some close encounters, but every action they take is first and foremost hostile before it is educational. With them, he'll find no connection either. And the one bond he does make, an Eloi named Weena, is lost in fleeing from the Morlocks. On an adventure to new places, one which highlighted, well, just how weak the Eloi are, as he often had to carry her just from a little bit of walking, they were pursued and Weena was lost, her physical inability conquering the mental ability she did have to connect with him. Their bond was a small proof of connection, but also of how much more fragile it is across time. Even when one emerges from that crowd with the will to learn, their makeup, their constitution may be so different that it becomes impossible. It's like witnessing another species with different senses. Even if we have the will to speak to them, we might lack the medium to do so. In the Traveler's case, Weena lacked a body which could match his, which could survive his curious pursuits, the things which made him human. Even if she lived, she could never come with him on all these. They could never become truly close. And if she tried, she would inevitably be lost, as we saw. He is alone more than we can ever know. In this time, when we are alone, we still share something with our common and fellow humans. Even if our politics, our culture, our customs are very distinct and different, we are all united in time, in history, social conditions, and world events. Every property we witness will have another fan. Every place we visit, another patron, down to the very nature that they exist concurrently. We cannot escape this bond, and it is always a hope to be less alone. But the Traveler lacks that connection of time. His body was raised in a different one, and his mind too, losing its place as he traverses the years and finding it incompatible with where he arrived. The fundamental and inherent hope for connection between all people is supremely weakened, if not entirely lost to him across all of those years. The second he stepped into that machine, he was alone. Eventually, he does claw his machine back from the Morlocks, using their fear of light to make a desperate rush to where it's being kept, but in his swiftness to flee as they try to rip him from the machine and likely eat him, he throws the lever forward rather than going back, going even further beyond as the forces weigh down on him. And he ends up some 30 million years into the future instead, a place where there aren't even descendants of the human race left, where there aren't even forgotten museums and disintegrating goods. There's only a blood-red beach roamed by horrors, by massive insects and crabs and lobsters the size of buildings and dragonflies that could probably eat him whole. As one of these approaches, reaching with its claws, he has to once again quickly escape even further, throwing that lever and finding himself forward once more into the blur of time. But a blur which is slowing as he progresses rather than speeding up as before. It's because the rotation of the Earth is actually ceasing, and so it becomes a still image. The light from behind begins to grow as the sun engulfs the planet, killing every creature in its last gasp of heat before dying out into nothingness. He is now resting upon a lifeless husk where humans once ruled but perished, where insects took over and roamed the whole thing, and where they died too. Overwhelmed, he just barely manages to return to his own time, to the start of the story. However, what he's witnessed here at the end of this planet will make him alone even as he returns. He's seen something that no human was ever meant to see, a proof of untold powerlessness and ultimate despair possible, where not just one's own life has ended, but the possibility for life itself has ended. He has witnessed a true meaninglessness, a feeling which cannot be communicated in ways we would understand. It is something which is only meant to be felt like death, once and then gone forever, almost intangible to us. But he alone is made to know it forever, and to be stuck as the only one to know it. No one will believe him on the basic premise of his journey alone, all of his most powerful experiences invalidated, and even if they do believe him, they can never feel what he has, see what he has. There is no single person who can truly communicate with the man emerging into this room broken and beaten and battered. His travel has made him fundamentally different from the people of his time. And so, his only recourse is to travel once more into the limbo that he is now made for. As the narrator, one of his few almost believers and consistent guests, approaches the lab to speak with him about this, he witnesses the traveler go off once more, saying he'll be back soon and disappearing into a blur. After 3 years, he's never returned, having left with the only proof of his claims that could ever exist. He is more than dead. He is lost by time, unable to be found by anyone who will ever know his name. No one will ever know his fate. His memory will be lost into what he found the second he finished the machine, into total isolation. Now, to be fair, the novella ends on a much more hopeful note, with the narrator stating this: "He, I know, thought but cheerlessly of the advancement of mankind, and saw in that growing pile of civilization only a foolish heaping that must inevitably fall back upon and destroy its makers in the end. If that is so, it remains for us to live as though it were not so. To me, the future is still black and blank. It is a vast ignorance, lit at a few casual places by the memory of his story." Despite being more hopeful, I don't think this diminishes the horror. Rather, it's stating that it's something we must face on our own. It's saying that our only choice is to live with it, to see through until the end of time and existence, which will be proved pointless, because what other option is there? In a way, time itself is the horror, the only thing which has a grip on the death of all creatures to ever exist, which will make and break every single action ever taken. The traveler simply witnessed this horror condensed down and digestible, presented not as millions times greater than a single life, and so obviously out of one's concern, but rather witnessing it within a few weeks or months instead. What he gained was the knowledge that we are all able to refuse due to our limitations, that time is the horror. But that was an example covering so much time. What about a lesser amount? Instead of trying to uncover the future of the whole human race, what about just some kids trying to fix their unideal days? After all, that's more than likely how the average person would end up using the ability to traverse time, to address their average problems. And so we're taking a step to video games for a moment to place this into the players, into our hands, for a quick look at the premise of how we would use time travel. Of course, this is going to be with the surprise hit from 2015, Life is Strange. What at first glance seemed to be a moody hipster game transformed into a beloved story that spawned an entire franchise, but we'll be sticking with just the original for this quick look here today. You play as Max Caulfield, a photography student at Blackwell Academy in the fictional town of Arcadia Bay, Oregon, who finds herself inexplicably able to rewind time after witnessing a girl be shot in the bathroom and trying to save her. It turns out that girl was her estranged friend Chloe, who she reunites with as they attempt to solve the disappearance of Chloe's seeming girlfriend Rachel, a web tying Arcadia Bay's shadiest characters together. The game's success is primarily on the back of its story, as it captures teenage angst in the usual excessively moody ways, but also off the back of the real tragedy that the characters experience, turning it from a simple idea of immaturity into a much more complex development of character motivations and relationships. Yes, they're immature, but they're a couple of high schoolers from a poor town trying to solve a murder linked to drug dealers and murderers. They're not prepared to deal with such things. There's harshness they're going through which creates that angst. Their experiences aren't really great enough to handle this yet. And likely unintentionally, that's kind of reflected in the gameplay. Now, many of the puzzles along the way are, well, a process of using the very near past to fix the present. For example, you get a question embarrassingly wrong after falling asleep in class, so once the teacher gives you the correct answer, you rewind time a minute or so in order to give the right answer instead. Or you have to get inside the dorm, but the mean girls are blocking the way, so you set up the past to make paint fall all over them, they move, and, well, you get right in. Most of the situations are some varying complexity of this, using a first failed attempt as information gathering in order to have a more successful second, third, or fourth go instead. In short, it's basically going with a guess and check approach. You shoot the windshield and nothing happens, so you rewind and shoot the bumper, and the result is even worse, so you rewind and shoot the tire, and finally you get the cool trick you wanted. Exhaust all options until one is good. That's the process. Sometimes it is a bit more complex, like when you need to get into the motorhome of Frank, the local drug dealer and generally dangerous guy. Since objects you're holding transport with you, grabbing his keys and rewinding will get you in, but they're in his pocket and you're a teenager against a large man with a gun. So you have to somehow get him to willingly take the keys out. This means getting dirt from the cop about Nathan's family, using that dirt to rile Nathan up enough to talk about Frank and Rachel in jealousy, which gets you the knowledge that Frank carries around a photo of her, ask for that, which plays to his desire to talk about someone he loved, and keys are on the table as he digs through his pockets. With the swipe off the table, some taunting and an insult, you rewind and the puzzle is solved. Now, I think that taunting is very telling though. It is a very immature solution all around, in the sense that it's actually quite sloppy as well. There's no way you could get everyone to talk like they did without being able to undo the obvious lead-in questions which start to tilt their hand and make them a bit angry. And gathering all that information would probably take a little bit longer than a meal would, so you'd have to rush a bit before the situation can move on before you're ready, which then necessitates it being a bit sloppy. And so it's a situation which isn't solved by skill or tact outside of time travel, but only in conjunction with it. They don't have to actually learn how to impact the world for any longer than a minute or two at a time, or get to know the people around them, but just how to press their buttons immediately. They're no longer bound to human limitations which demand a compromise of skill, speed, subtlety, and effectiveness. They're free to just guess and check into even the most immediate danger with no plan outside of use Max's power and we'll be fine.
This isn't a toy, Chloe. I do have to be careful how I use it.
Screw that! Of course it's a toy. The best toy ever?
What this leads to is the reason why that teenage angst works so well. These are people who have actually lost the reason to grow out of it. They're static for a reason. I've been a Chloe Price fan from day one, and clearly many others across these 10 years have agreed with me there. But I also can't deny all the points from the people who kind of hate her. She makes terrible decisions, borrowing money from the most dangerous people in town, and then trying to shake down the clearly mentally unstable and dangerous rich kid to pay off those debts, and then messes around in a junkyard with her father's stolen gun, shoots herself by accident, and gets caught in the train tracks. Without Max there, she should have been dead 3 times over at least, and she even acknowledges this. But never once does she change her behavior to need Max's powers less, but instead she even starts to rely on them more, and making those plans which amount to nothing more than, well, Max will save us by undoing our actions. What reason does she have to ever plan or act safely again when even shooting herself has no consequence? Aside from a change to the distant past that we won't be covering here today, there is no real growth to her because of this. Her almost girlfriend was sleeping with Frank behind her back and then disappeared. Why does everyone abandon her? Max's parents moved the family to Seattle, and so they fell out of contact as calls and letters stopped. Why does everyone abandon her? Her father died when she was 12 in a car accident. Why does everyone abandon her? These are complex situations that are some mixture of abandonment, but also chance and distance and selfishness to some degree, and a lot more going on in these interpersonal connections. But she only ever sees the part of it which lets her justify staying as she is. She's learned only to see the world 2 minutes at a time because that's the easier way. Act as you want, and if things go wrong, Max will save you. I think this is what would happen to anyone without consequence. Chloe started this way, but we witness her involvement drag Max into terrible behaviors and situations as well. To be fair, it is also just teaching Max to live a little bit more loosely and enjoy life, but we can't discount that introduces a lot of danger. A much more timid girl hiding in the back of class, she didn't seem to be the kind of person to taunt Frank and call him an idiot while stealing his keys. But now, why shouldn't she? She'll never see a consequence from bad behavior, and that fact alters her behavior, making her someone much less tuned into and avoiding danger, instead letting her stick her head right into the beast's mouth and be fine. I think the girls get too accustomed to this, relying on guessing and checking alone. Is it any wonder that the pair is eventually roped into the absolute worst outcome from all of their actions, becoming the next victims to the real culprit when they're so open to facing that danger head-on without a plan? They were creeping closer and closer to it without ever learning how to properly handle it, feeling isolated from it even as it was gripping their shoulders time and time again. Max survives entirely by the luck of someone not knowing her power of escaping into photos, and the exact right ones being conveniently available. And Chloe's fate is down to what you as the player take from this as the final decision. Should Max live with sadness but learn, or escape from it instead? There's a meta aspect to this all as well. How do you solve a situation which is free from limitation? That means it shouldn't have an answer. Life is Strange is all about drawing the ideal from the situations they face, and as a video game, it can only do so effectively by providing limited options to you, even though your time should be unlimited. The dialogue tree isn't a mess of slightly different wordings and tones to weed information out. It's short and simple choices between a few options with the intent that exploring them all is ideal. When you have to solve the less social and more obstacle-based puzzles, the items needed are called out for you, and the ideal case is made clear by the lack of remaining options. The game moves you on into a new area and you can't return. There's only one solution and you find it. And when time travel is not just relevant, but decided as an option for you to take, you get cues and hints as that fact, from UI to voice lines, designed to streamline the experience. In terms of game design, this is all great work. You need the player to feel on track and rewarded for their actions. But this shows the flaw of time travel in regards to what satisfies human. We don't want infinite options like time travel should present. We want a few nice and obvious limited options with much more definite outcomes. The game itself even has the characters face this. In social situations with long-term implications, such as reporting Nathan, the wealthy donor family's son, for having a gun at school, there will be a thought from Max doubting whichever option you choose. Report him, and she'll bemoan the principal's clear siding with donations. Don't, and she'll be upset that the danger is still there untouched. You can rewind and choose the other path, but neither one is actually satisfying. There's doubt either way that you are forced to live with. Could you imagine how unsatisfying it would be if this was the game, a whole adventure with no certainty, if this was every decision? Without the obvious hints at when to time travel and the lack of options knowing that you're done, that would be the game. We would be trying again and again just to make sure something wasn't missed. Without those plain dialogue trees, we'd get overwhelmed with human complexity and look for answers that didn't involve people. If we weren't pushed forward into the next area unlocked there, we'd probably rewind and try subtle changes just to see if maybe things could get a bit better. After all, what does 5 minutes mean against how now infinite life is? Without all these limitations, the game would be horrible. It would be deeply unsatisfying because we don't desire infinite paths and all that worry and wonder. We desire a clearly finite one with confirmation and validation. We feel best when there are no more buttons to press, and in the real world, there's always going to be more. And this is what we'll see in the next stories. We take a step back 5 years to 2010 in Madoka Magica now, a show which hides its time travel premise for as long as possible in contrast to our other stories. Now there's a lot going on in this one, but to keep it short in a way which will spoil everything, so here's your warning to skip this section if you don't want it spoiled. Teenage girls in stressful situations are offered a deal by Kyubey. Make a contract with it to receive a wish in exchange for a duty to fight witches, the source of evil in their world, which manifests to non-magical girls as catastrophes, depression, and so on, keeping the magical girl world self-contained. Of course, things aren't so simple, as it's revealed that the wishes are more of a monkey's paw style, and that the witches are formerly magical girls lost to despair when they fail to cleanse their own soul, which can only be done by fighting the very thing which helps muddy it to begin with. And so, from the second that they make the contract, their fate to one day become a witch is sealed. One of these girls is Homura Akemi, a frail and shy student who transfers from a hospital back to school mid-year, finding herself constantly behind, whether it's sports or math. Feeling worthless and alone, with no connections or family to be seen, she becomes a prime target for witches and almost falls to the self-hate and depression they amplify in her. But at the last second, she's saved by her classmate Madoka and upperclassman Mami, developing a deep adoration and even love for the former, who begins to guide her through a new world, her first real connection and only spark of self-worth. From the gutter to the heavens, her entire world is lifted and changed for the better. Of course, things aren't to last, as Walpurgisnacht, a powerful witch, is soon tearing through the city and killing Madoka, a girl who would always fight for the sake of people she loved. Distraught by the loss of this only valuable thing in her life, Homura finally makes a contract with Kyubei, willing to trade her soul for what she desires most.
I wish I could meet Miss Kaname all over again. I want to be strong enough to protect her!
From this wish, she's given the powers to both stop and reverse time. And it becomes her greatest asset, or maybe her worst nightmare, as something she'll do again and again and again. She tries to prevent Madoka's death, but while we witness a whole episode of timelines where she fails no matter her methods, and there are probably more we don't witness as well. I mean, she can warn the others or not, come at Walpurgisnacht with more force, even prevent Madoka from becoming a magical girl at all, but nothing seems to actually prevent her death. Sometimes, in the most tragic cases, Homura is even the one forced to bring death to her before Madoka can become the most powerful witch to ever exist. It's a tough task. It's essentially like trying to stop a natural disaster of your own will by yourself. Imagine your house, your community, your entire city being devastated by a hurricane or earthquake or tsunami or anything like that. You lose family and friends. You wait desperately for relief, and every plan you have ever made for your life is out of the window, as your only goal now is recovering what you can. It is undeniably the worst day of your life. Now, in Homura's case, imagine doing that again and again and again and again and again and again. What Homura is doing to herself is reliving exactly that kind of day, the worst that her life could ever have in such a short amount of time and endlessly. And this reveals exactly why such a thing fundamentally changes us. As regular people who live, for all intents and purposes, boring lives when compared to a story, these moments are spread out, usually not happening even within a few years of each other. We have time to recover between them, to regain something which was lost, our home, our friends, our dreams, our life itself. We have the time to recover what makes us human as we're pushed forward in time to many boring days between, and so we don't see that what's being robbed of us is expressly our humanity, what makes us more than drones. But we do see this in Homura. In the first timeline, she runs to Madoka in excitement, delighted to see someone she traded her soul for again. She gives it her all to train, to become better by her side despite all the doubt and shame. She's resolved from the disaster, using her energy to change things for the better. But by the show's main timeline, she simply gives her one love a distant, piercing stare, as if Madoka is ruining her life simply by existing, a cold and detached girl who would murder her friends if it meant saving her one more day. She directly admits this here.
If you make her suffer any more, then I will kill you right here, right now.
Her idea of saving someone has become murdering others. It's become locking that person in the cage because their own will, their own expression of what it means to be human, is what harms them when you look at infinite time. In solving the past, she becomes that drone which time's passage and mundanity prevents. To handle so many worse days in a row, she has to become less human, less impacted by the loss of all the things which define our lives. The horror is how inhuman the time traveler must become to survive. So why does she remain in this loop again and again, even as it harms her so, makes her someone Madoka is less and less able to actually connect to? It's literal torture which is costing her everything she's worked so hard for, so it doesn't make sense to do this, does it? But that's exactly the point. The logic she operates by is now different than what any human has ever known. We, as limited humans, have to come to terms with those worst days, our losses and our failures, exactly because we are limited, stuck in the time in which we're born and acting through. We can't try and fix a situation which is past as much as we may like to, because even if we have the will, the situation simply no longer is. Its time and place and people altered. We learn to cope with our failures, to move on in life because we have to. The limitation of our world demands it, and then eases the pain. Sure, we made a mistake, but we're just one person. We could never understand or control the full extent of a situation, see every detail, and make the correct call. We did the best we could. We have to, and we are able to live with our failure because of this limitation. But Homer doesn't share the same limitation as us. She can pause time and see the exact attack which is coming. She can reverse it again and again to retry, each time uncovering more and more details. Hell, she could go back in time and literally just spy on Madoka for an entire lifetime to learn every detail about her, wasting a whole timeline and information alone if she wants. Her time is literally unlimited, so what does it matter? Spending a whole lifetime just to know what happens on one day is of no cost compared to infinity. She has no need to cope because of that, and so she never does. She'll stay, even as it tortures her, because lying ahead of that torture is the potential for an infinite time of joy, which is always greater. She also continues because this ability to understand so much removes the world's blame and leaves it on her. There is always another try with better perspective to be had, more information within her reach. She can logically never move on, as doing so becomes an admission not of her fault in conjunction with the world, but simply herself. She is a failure by the choice to let the situation pass. In this way, the horror of time travel is godhood. It forces one to try and be perfect, to make a mortal mind understand the immortal. There's more logic as to why she remains in this above just fixing it though. I think that even if she could fix it, she would end up in this loop the same way. I've always stuck on the detail that when she makes her wish for Madoka, she specifies not to be able to be with her, but to meet her again. This ties it to that specific moment of hope, the one where she feels like a valuable person for the first time, someone worth saving, watching in amazement as a literal magical girl appeared before her, glamorous and amazing, before she ever knew how dark this fate was, and it seemed so golden and perfect and hopeful. This, in contrast to what we just covered, is the best moment of her life, one she'll always remember and be tied to. It's what made everything that follows. Normally we have these moments, and the same thing happens as with our worst. The world changes as time moves on. We wish desperately to hold them. We would live in these pockets of the best reality has to offer if we could, trying to do anything but face our greatest fear of the unknown. Will we ever see another moment like this one in the future? Will we ever be so happy again? Will our successes and greatest things just run out entirely? Because of our limitations, we're forced to grow to handle this fear, to learn from these moments and change from the people who had them into the people who can go out there and get them again so that we can face uncertainty. Just like coping with the worst, we have to cope with the best. And this directly relates our ability to change for the better to the forward passage of time. And once again, Homer lacks this reason. As far as she's ever seen, reality is overwhelmingly harsh. She's been hospitalized and left behind, overwhelmed and abandoned, even considered ending her life before it really began. As time moved on for her, again and again, nothing good came of it. So why, when she finally found something good, would she ever go into the unknown again? To her, it has a much greater chance of bringing loss and pain. To remain here, looping again and again, it keeps the moment as the best of her life and keeps it here forever. Time travel creates a selfishly eternal bliss. It's not certain that she would live this one moment forever if she could save Madoka. I think, more realistically, she may live as long as possible together and rewind later on. But even so, is there any reason for her not to undo every little mistake or threat along the way? Why deal with the relationship breaking down over differences, for example, when she could just rewind time to when they were completely happy? she still has no reason to grow, and as we've already seen, she even regresses. Because once she enters this pattern, it becomes very hard to stop. Why would she ever learn to be kind and diffuse a bad situation when rewinding is an option? She is literally out of practice for positive qualities, and each and every day that's more and more the truth. She has forgotten how to be anything but what she exactly is right now. However, this doesn't seem to line up. If all of this is true, why does her best moment slowly become her worst and she's so unhappy? If all of this is true, shouldn't she be in bliss? In an isolated situation, yes. If it was just her, yeah. The issue was her reliance on others, the mismatch between a girl out of time and one within it. Even if the situation is perfect for Homer's reduced humanity, it won't be for Madoka's excess of it. What Homer requires is a stasis. She needs everything to remain exactly as it was, a picture-perfect snap of the greatest time. But changing growth is what every other person is seeking for the exact same reason, to regain their happiest time. They, the ones out or the ones in time, still feel their mistakes as permanent. They still see their moments slip away and have to search for new ones. Even as Homer resets the timeline again and again, they don't know this. And even when they do, they can't control it, so their only choice is to proceed as they always would, to grow better. Homer can set up every condition to be perfect, but she can fundamentally never align the wills of the people within those conditions because they are always bound by time, just living in a different kind of world than she is. The only way Homura could ever make them comply is by force. And this is something we see to a degree. In the main timeline for the anime, Madoka has yet to become a magical girl due to Homura's intervention. And Madoka feels terrible for this, watching all of her friends go out and fight for others, for her sake, and having to stand on the sideline, able to be nothing more than a shoulder to cry on as they risk their lives and fight. She's the kind of person who would always help others, but she's being prevented from taking the steps she needs to in order to help those important people, a restriction which seems to hurt her very soul. Of course, it's done for her survival, hundreds of worlds where she dies being prevented, but she can't take this into account. She can only feel her emotions of this world, the one where she's in pain. It leads to Homer's one care in the world weeping and crying, feeling absolutely worthless as Homer herself once did, forced to consider time and time again giving up her own soul just to ease that pain, and so Homer should understand how awful this feels. And so she should know deep down that it's pointless, that it's a pain which changes someone. If Madoka continues to feel this way, even if she's physically saved, she'll be a different person than the one Homer originally set out to save. The perfect image of that important day is replaced with a new, depressing reality, even if everything goes as well as it can. And if Madoka doesn't change, then she remains as the kind of person who will always give of herself to save others, the one Homer loves who will leave her exactly because that's what her love is. She either captures someone different or loses the one she wants. The very point of her time travel has defeated itself. I think this is an extension of usual human traits. We see time and time again that when we stop trying to live with something or someone and start trying to capture it, ensure it forever, we lose sight of what the point was in the first place. That we stop having fun in the passion we make a career, or lose all of our time with someone in order to secure a better house to never be in it with them. It's things like that. And time travel has simply extended this quality, which so often leads to mistakes, taking us into a realm where it defines us even further, across not 5 years, but 5,000, and leaving us with no reason to ever change this fact. It's a space where anxiety and fear do not lead to action, but to inaction, where human dies defending its own meaning. The ability to be outside of time has simply made Homura the worst a human can be forever. That is the horror of time travel. Its amorality leads us to amplify our worst. But maybe the problem in Madoka Magica was simply that someone selfish was at the wheel, and so all we witnessed was an extension of their worst traits and not humanity's overall. What if someone had the same option, but was using it for the sake of others? This is more akin to the situation in Steins, moving forward only 1 year from our previous entry to 2011. Okabe Rintaro, also known by his mad scientist persona Halloween Kiyoma, is the leader of a ragtag laboratory producing benign inventions, like a toy ray gun that can change TV channels but only positively, or a spy cam without a stabilizer so the footage is a spinning blur, or a microwave that can be started by a text, for all those times where you put food in them and then leave the house. But that last one actually ends up being a lot more. Through a combination of entirely accidental circumstances, what they invent with it is a time machine. Sort of. They can send data back in time through text, known as D-mails, but nothing more, and its amount of data is very limited. However, this still offers them the ability to alter their present through the past. For example, one case of them fixing time is when one of the group, Ferris, requests to send a text back in time to her father. 10 years earlier, she was mad at him for choosing to work over her birthday, and seeing her angry texts, he decided to get on an earlier flight back and be with his daughter, a flight that crashed. The solution is obvious. Send him their text back apologizing for the first one so he never feels guilty enough to leave early and he doesn't get on that flight. They do so, and he lives. These are the kinds of problems that they solve. Whatever can be done with a single text or two, although some venture into unlikely territory like changing one of their sexes through a pager message, although we'll get into how that plays into things later. The issue here arises in complexity. Now, shows like Madoka sidestep this by having the issues be very private, between very few individuals and across minimal time. For example, since only magical girls can see the effects of their actions, then what they change between themselves in these few months shouldn't change much about the world outside. Or at least it can kind of be suspended of disbelief that way. But it's not actually the case, and that nature is what Steins leans into, the inherent chaos of messing with time. As Okabe and crew send these texts back in time, the present begins to change, although only Okabe is able to remember the previous timelines. Now what he sees at first is very minimal, as they try to play small winning lottery tickets to test their abilities and alter things within just a few weeks. Everything seems to remain, well, mostly the same around them in Akihabara, save maybe a few hours worth of memories here and there. However, as time progresses, and as they reach further back in time as well, which simulates the same thing, well, the effects they could have never calculated come to light. Through saving Ferris's father, for example, they alter the entire fate of Akihabara, turning it from a moe paradise into just another business district without character. Okabe runs around this new space, seeing every location which they once frequented gone, every important place removed from time. How many lives were altered from this text, businesses that never opened and ones that did instead? They sought to make one girl happy, and in the process shifted millions of lives. It's a proof that no situation, however personal, has impacts limited to just the people seemingly involved. But more notably for them, through using the time machine at all, and progressing it even further to send consciousness back in time as well, they caught the attention of CERN with an S, in this world an evil organization bent on discovering and wielding time travel for ultimate control. CERN raids the lab and every time kills the unnecessary for their plans Mayuri, Okabe's longest and most important friend. It's a result that they could have never foreseen. How could just a few texts meant to better their lives change so much and in such nonsensical ways? Sure, they could have been more careful in their calculations, but even if they were, the problem is that it's impossible to actually calculate everything. With each change, they are creating new variables which only exist in that timeline. Keeping Ferris's father alive is creating so many variables they can never calculate, because in the world they know and can calculate from, he doesn't even exist. How can he know the way in which he'd change things, which people he'd meet and where he'd go, if he doesn't even exist? You could sit down and run through the whole list of causes and effects in your world from A to Z and still never be able to see even a fraction of how new ones will sprout and multiply in exponential form. This is how such nonsensical results occur, like each JML they send changing how quickly CERN does or doesn't move in on their lab. It makes no sense that their actions can impact the time of the raid. But that's the point. Somewhere, somehow, there is a through line between these things, but it's one embedded in so much chaos it's impossible to see and impossible to understand. As such, their time travel can never be used responsibly, even such a minimal version of time travel, and even with the infinite time it offers to calculate, because the changes defeat the planning. Even if they somehow did and fixed everything, what comes after fixing everything? You would have to wait until the end of time itself to see what occurred from all of that fix to know if it was really so or not. And then if it isn't, you have to go back all that time and try it again. And if it is, then you go back in time and live differently since you're no longer just watching the progression of time for results. And then that changes the future anyway. The result is always chaos. To use this ability properly, Okabe's entire life would be waiting and gathering data just to alter a few words in a single text over and over. It's like the most basic scientific principles taken to a dystopian fantasy where humans are used as sensors to gather data and nothing more. Because of this complex nature, time travel also starts to necessitate itself, or rather, it becomes required to destroy itself. Okabe attempts to save Mayuri without changing all they did before, seeking to escape the raid beforehand by car or rail, fight it off just before with or without arms, and every single time, no matter the plan, Mayuri still dies. It only makes sense. He's one single man up against all of time's chaos here, the evil organization seeking to wield it included. He's unable to change the future by moving forward because one will is rarely enough to alter something so immediate. By that token then, if he wants to save his friend, he can only go backwards. And since it is impossible to calculate what each change will truly produce, then he can only go backwards to some time he already knows. Logically, all he can do is undo his own time travel based actions. They determine that the sole path forward is erasing all of the demails from ever happening and returning to their original timeline. The only one where they know for certain that this can't happen by the empirical act of living in that time already. They're forced to use it only to destroy it, sending Okabe through the mental anguish just to re-reach the starting point of their lives with no gain. And it is anguish. Not all of the texts were apparent to him, as some hid what they sent, some lied, and others were the only ones to have the numbers they sent them to. So, he has to go about convincing all of the people he helped to undo the best parts of their lives, giving up a loving father or their true identity in order to prevent a future they can't even be certain of, forced to assault a lonely and desperate woman to take her phone because of things he could never explain to her. There's no way they can comprehend all he's seen, so even if it is for their best interest, they'll still be hurt and cry at their losses, something he has to witness each and every time with each and every one. Much like the other cases, and being alone with the knowledge of infinite time, Okabe is forced to understand things differently, to be the only one to see pain now as preventing much more later on, and all he gets is his old life, but with so much knowledge it hurts. But this is also the next layer. When the logical conclusion is to return, one no longer simply exists in their reality. They must consciously choose it, be responsible for it, pain to their friends and all. Okabe is now the one who made them fatherless or the wrong sex rather than the world. But this is taken to the extreme most with Kurisu, Okabe's romantic interest and physicist who made this all possible. As they're undoing the texts, which is properly saving them from the raid a day at a time, they begin to be hopeful until a realization sets in. The first text he sent was an accident, but an accident that prevented Kurisu from being stabbed to death. If they undo this last one, she dies, but if they don't, Mayuri dies. Before this realization, you could still reason they were reaching a better world. All his friends were still happy in the original timeline, as they had to learn to live with their natural pain, and a life they all knew was saved. It was logical to return. But now there is no better option. There was only a choice between deaths, a choice on Okabe's hands directly. He struggles with this for an unknown amount of time, shutting everyone else out and canceling anything and everything at the lab to lie on the roof alone, just waiting for disaster again and again. Because what else can he do? In that isolation of being the only one to remember, the to be left alone with experiences he's had with people, but who haven't had them with him, well, his world will be forever different from theirs. This isolation is the only thing he can do to not break down at the mere sight of them, because time travel has amplified everything he feels. It makes it almost impossible not to be overwhelmed by any sort of connection with any person throughout that travel. He has lived what feels like years with these people, even if they've only known each other for 1 month. His feelings and emotions are across so much more time than they should be, condensed down into such a small chunk that he's alone in the strength of his feelings. From living everyone else's worst moments for them and not even being able to bond with them through the pain, because they don't know it happened. When Kurisu does finally force him to open up about it, he breaks down for this very reason. He is able to convince her of his dilemma's truth through personal details and the knowledge she does have, and they're both forced to weigh the trading of lives. They eventually settle on trading Kurisu's for Mayuri's, as what other option is there once she knows? With the knowledge shared between them both, the pain is doubled, 2 having to choose death instead of 1. The least pain comes about in their original time, where only Okabe has to live with choosing death. So, this is all they can do, surviving on the hope that in totality across timelines, they'll be more alive and more happy than dead.
There are infinite lines. What if each one has its own me? Many stars shining in their own space, but just one constellation. Getting to be in so many times and places? That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
And so they return, and Okabe is left alone with this hope, shaken from his decision and the knowledge only he holds. But things don't end there, as this time is now one in which World War III occurs. Kurisu, dying, places her paper about time travel right into her abusive father's hands. He flees to Russia with it, and a time machine arms race ensues to destroy the world. With help from the future, they're given the chance to stop it, but what they find is, of course, only more chaos. Okabe is the one who stabs Kurisu exactly because he tries to save her and prevent this future. What he sees in episode 1 is his own actions. Returning with enough fuel for one more attempt, he refuses. What else can he do against all of time? Whatever he chooses, pain will still occur, people will still die, the future will still fall into ruin, if not now, then some other time later. He hurt all his friends, and what he got was World War III, so what's the point? Trying is just reminding himself that he is now responsible because he selects the timeline. From happy marriage to World War III, it's all on your consciousness, a recipe for eternal madness. The only thing a limited mind can do to cope with this is give up. And so he does. He refuses the remaining try, and we get the events of Steins Gate 0. In this follow-up anime, Okabe is a shell of his former self, living in the world without Kurisu, but entirely unhappy. He avoids the lab, which reminds him of his choice, isolating him from the very girl he did all this to save, and his other friends alike. He's on path for a more average life, studying harder in college and straightening up all around, but for no result more than to simply keep existing. How can one be happy in that world where there is never an excuse for relaxation or an action? Now, Zero slots in between the final 2 episodes of the original, leaving it prior to a much more hopeful end. One where Okabe does try once more, saves the day by tricking himself, and does truly fix time. They reach an ideal timeline. But it comes about from a mixture of love, pain, and a lot of responsibility. As he's sulking around in the Zero timeline, everyone else is still working on how to fix things. Even into the war while he's in a coma, tens of years into the future, they're still trying. They're developing the very time machine that gave him his final shot so many years ago. Every single friend was still fighting, keeping his body and spirit alive so that their other selves in a time they'll never witness could know a better world than they ever did. They understand that even if things are terrible, giving up only guarantees that they stay as such, while trying anyway keeps the possibility of something better alive. When Okabe wakes up and sees their efforts across so many years, he feels selfish enough to finally try once more, knowing that if a terrible future can occur no matter what, then he may as well try and prevent it, the only way to ever clear his conscience to a degree. So he does, developing a video to be sent back in time to himself, one which convinces him to try again and provides them with the solution. Steins Gate has a happy ending, only because of 24 episodes of pain within zero, tens of years of effort, and only due to the logic of chaos, that if nothing is certain, we may as well try. It's a small hope as the ending note of such great responsibility from such a small accident, a message that things can be fixed, but that it will take its toll, and that once we dip our toes into absolute responsibility for those fixings, we must see it through with every effort. That the duty of a human with control over time is that of a tortured god. It is a hopeful horror, a responsibility that can never be denied once gained. And that will wrap things up for this one. I originally had a kind of rambly, fake philosophical outro to go here, but I don't know, it just didn't seem right, so I went ahead and figured I would just do something like this instead. It's just going to be short, asking, of course, what you thought of it, if there's anything you missed. There was a bit I cut out in editing where I'm trying to kind of get down on restating myself in certain things, so let me know if you think it feels different than that, if it's more streamlined and less repetitive, because I had seen that criticism before. If I missed anything about the characters, or you think there's anything else to add to the discussion, of course, because I do like to, go down there, and if I miss something, great, and I can see it, then I know for next time and get better. So that sharing of information is really important and stuff. But other than that, if you want to see more of this format, let me know, because I am trying to bring it back a little bit more and working on more for it. But other than that, there's important links in the pinned comment, Discord, and then 2 links for channel memberships, which you can also just do on the page here, or Patreon, where either one of those lets you support me for a little bit a month to help keep this whole shenanigan going. I haven't done outros in a while. Anyway, supporters' names on screen. Thanks for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.